you can tell us about what Steve Koonin has written in this book. He's saying that public discussions about climate change and energy have become increasingly distant from the science. He writes, much of the public portrayal of climate science is an effort to persuade rather than inform. And the information presented withholds either essential context or what doesn't fit. Is he right there? And that's pretty concerning if he is.
Well, what's really interesting is that when people leave the service of government or universities or research institutions like the CSIRO, all of a sudden they start to speak the truth. It's incredible that when you're not dependent upon governments and research grants, the truth starts to win. And this is exactly what has happened. So here we have a scientist who's looked at the broad evidence, and this evidence is not only doing mathematical calculations on the atmosphere and changing numbers which people in previous generations measured, but it's actually looking at the whole spectrum of science. And when I did that in my book Heaven and Earth more than 10 years ago, you can see very, very clearly that we are being misled. We are being misled with information which is either cooked or very, very specifically plucked out to make the story look as if we are in a crisis. We're not in a crisis. There is no climate emergency. We are living in the best times you could ever live on planet Earth. And we are so fragile and we're so protected and we're so wealthy that if someone drops a feather, we panic.
Well, it seems people are desperate to feel like there is a crisis and to be anxious about it. Steve Koonin also makes the point in his book that governments across the globe are making trillion-dollar decisions based on what is seen to be settled science. Have a look at Joe Biden's massive new commitment last week to reduce emissions. Are we rushing to close down entire industries based on incomplete science, Ian?
No, this is just another tulip craze. We've seen these things before. We're so wealthy, we can afford to waste enormous amounts of money. The key scientific point is it has never been proven that human emissions of carbon dioxide drive global warming. Only 3% of emissions are from humans. The rest is natural, from ocean degassing mainly, but some from volcanoes. So if you're to prove that humans and their emissions of the gas of life change climate, then you also have to prove that the natural emissions, 97% of all emissions, don't change climate. That has never been addressed. We have a fallacy from day one in this whole climate hysteria. It's got nothing to do with the environment. It's got nothing to do with being green, except that being green means you get a huge pile of greenbacks. This is about money. This has got nothing to do with the climate. It's got nothing to do with the environment. It is, can I create a new way to skin the punter alive? And that's what's happening. Just look at your electricity bill and just wonder why in this country we had cheap, reliable electricity. Now it's very expensive. Now your job is threatened because of this expensive electricity. This is probably the biggest con that we've ever had, maybe the biggest con since the Dutch tulip craze. It is a con. It's not underpinned by science. It's very interesting that when people are not beholden to government, then all of a sudden they speak the truth. Isn't that wonderful?
Well, yes, but we talk about our energy costs in this country and the impact on the average punter. We're now hearing speculation that Scott Morrison is going to formally adopt a net zero policy by 2050 and even have more bold targets for emission reductions. What is that going to do to our energy prices? What's that going to do to our industries and way of life?
Well, I was here in Sydney and was at the BCA dinner that Scott Morrison spoke about, and I was shocked. And it's hard to shock me because I've done some pretty dreadful things in my life and I'm very much aware of the way the world works. But here we want net zero emissions. And all I say is if you want to promote net zero emissions, then you have to lead by example. The first thing is you breathe in 0.04% carbon dioxide and you breathe out 4%. So if you want to demonstrate that you are a moral person following net zero emissions, stop breathing. Stop using electricity. Stop eating food. And if you grow food, you need diesel to plough. You need diesel to harvest. You need diesel to process. You need diesel to bring that food to the cities. If you are really committed to net zero, let me see your life. Let me have a look at your life. A life where you'd use no fossil fuels, no plastics, no electricity, and you wouldn't breathe. This is total, absolute.
But Ian, of course, they would say that you wouldn't do that. They would say you can still maintain your living standard with batteries and renewables and other sources of energy, that you wouldn't be destroying your living standards by adopting those bold targets. Are you saying that's not possible?
Well, I'd like to see a country that does that. Germany's tried to do that and it's got serious problems. Batteries last a few minutes. That doesn't work in an industrial society. Your solar power only works during the day, and then the refuse that you have from that is toxic and destroys the environment. And the subsidies that go into solar and wind are really what it's all about. We don't have this alternative to energy based on simple logic. We have it based on subsidies. Turbines spin because of subsidies, not because of the wind. We get solar energy, not because of the wind, the sun, but because of subsidies. So we have a grossly mismanaged electricity system, and that system is based on a fallacy. And the fallacy is that we are reducing carbon dioxide emissions by having solar power. I'm sorry, to build a solar power plant, you actually create more emissions than you'd save. The same with a wind power plant, the same with batteries. This is an absolute con. We once had a country that had cheap, reliable electricity based on coal. And if you want to pull electricity off the grid and use it, most of it comes from coal. If you want to drive an electric car, it's not an electric car, it's a coal car. And we are having a perversion of the language to be able to try to persuade people that they are doing something morally good by sending this nation bankrupt. It is madness, and I would prefer to wait to see another country have complete green energy.
I'm with you. Let someone else do it first, and we can follow if that example is workable. And I'm all for doing our part, but I'm not for bankrupting our nation so some people can feel better about themselves. Ian Plimer, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you very much, Rita.